Thank you very much, Vincent, for the nice introduction, and it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak to you, and especially an honor to follow Luciano this morning. If only I had the opportunity to talk about the kind of research I'm doing, which follows so nicely from that. But the exam question that Bruce and I were set by Vincent was to do with the kind of issues that we've been grappling with in our field, in the speech technology area. So technologies like automatic speech recognition, text-to-speech synthesis, speaker recognition, things like this, to look at our field as an example of the way in which a very difficult human behavior has been tackled, has created technologies which support it and mirror it, and indeed have achieved some commercial penetration. So what Bruce and I are going to do really is just take you through the landscape of our field, and hopefully you'll be able to draw some analogies with respect to the cognitive robotics area, and we can talk in the workshop about where there might be overlaps, lessons to be learnt in either direction, and things like that. So, speech technology, past, present, and future. In fact, people have been building speech technology devices for a very, very long time indeed. 200 years ago, first speaking machine was produced by von Kempelin, and there's been pretty much continuous development since that time, particularly since the mid-1900s, the 1950s, and you can see an example of that's actually a speech synthesizer on the left there. It's an enormous rack of equipment, sort of thing that's now sitting hidden away in your phone. And even some early toys. Radio Rex was a little dog that would jump out of its kennel when a child shouted Rex. Talking dolls in the 80s, Speak and Spell. A number of you may have may recognize that. Maybe you had it as a kid, or you've seen it in an antique shop. But this was a wonderful piece of technology using the very latest techniques for speech coding to compress speech down to get it on a chip and to create a teaching aid. Of course, more recently, we've seen some dramatic developments, particularly in automatic speech recognition, and this kind of new wave of abilities really kicked off in the 1980s when we started to see real-time speech recognition devices which for the first time could recognize continuous speech, rather than up until that point you could only talk to a speech recognizer like that. And given that one of the main selling points of our field is it's natural, clearly that wasn't a very satisfactory situation. But in the 80s, we discovered a pretty neat algorithm for dealing with that. And that led to, in the late 90s, the release of Dragon Naturally Speaking, which hopefully many of you will have perhaps come across. Software that you could install on your PC and would allow you to dictate documents. And you could pretty much say anything. Just as a matter of interest, how many people here have used that kind of technology, have played around with Dragon Dictate? Yeah, okay, a reasonable number. And of course, what's been happening much more recently is that kind of technology, which needed an entire PC's worth of processing to make it function, of course now is wound up in your pocket. It's on your mobile phone. And so we saw the appearance of voice search and even voice dictation on smartphones. And then we arrived, 2011, big announcement, Siri, Apple's Siri appears. And this is a very significant moment in our field, not in the sense of technological development or in the sense of research results, because a lot of the techniques that are embedded in Siri have been in research labs for 10, maybe 15 years at least. But what Siri did was bring our technology into the consumer marketplace, and suddenly your grandmother had heard of what you were doing and realized what it was you were actually up to back in your research lab. So I'm going to ask another question now. How many of you are aware that you're carrying a speech recognizer with you? Good, large number, right. So you all know, a lot of you know that on your phone you've actually got speech technology devices. How many of those have got Siri with them right now? About half, yep, good. How many have had a go with Siri or whatever you've got on your phone and actually tried it out? Not so many hands now, okay. How many had such a fantastic experience when they did it that they now use it every day? There's usually one. No, he's not here today. Good. No, not good, but yeah. There's usually an extreme enthusiast. Of course, 2011 is already in the past, and things have moved on a bit, and now we have competitors popping up. EV, which is a free one, in British English. We've got Google now, we've got Cortana from Microsoft. And of course, the difference between Siri, I forgot to say, the difference between Siri and the kind of technologies we had immediately before is the interest now is not in transcribing what you say, but doing more than that, actually, in some sense, understanding what you say. So trying to act upon commands or questions rather than just being able to write an email. The very latest stuff is in something called speech-to-speech translation. And, yeah, let me just see whether I'm going to attempt to do a live demo. So if you have not seen this kind of thing before, actually this app is free and you can download it. So speech-to-speach translation essentially brings a lot of these different technologies together. So it's going to recognize what you say. I'm going to attempt to demonstrate this. It's going to translate what I say, which will be in English, to another language, which is currently set for Japanese, but this app you can dial up lots of different languages. And then it's going to use speech synthesizer to synthesize the result. So here we go, live demo in a lovely acoustic environment. Where is the nearest hospital? Thanks for not coughing while I was speaking. Okay, it's thinking about it. Okay, oh. Anybody speak Japanese? Did it say the right thing? Good, okay. We actually, my lab worked with that system and that was available for the 2012 Olympics in London, so you could have used that if you had known. Okay, where's my gizmo? Right. So that's kind of where we are. So what I'm going to do now is sort of summarize the state of the art. And basically, for 15 or 20 years, we've pretty much had steady year-on-year progress. It's every year there are new results. We have large conferences, and it is possible to say that performance of just about all the technologies that are involved in processing speech are getting better year after year, and that's just fantastic. Now, how do I know that, and what's going on behind the scenes? Well, the improvements are coming from some pretty obvious places. First of all, and not by any means to be underestimated, the fact that computing power, we saw the other Moore's law earlier, the fact that computers are just getting so much faster and getting significant processing power just sitting in your pocket has had a dramatic effect, because a lot of the techniques that are used, for example, in automatic speech recognition, almost always stress out whatever processor you have. We can use every cycle, and the more we can use, the more accurate it will be, because recognition is a search process, and so the more power, the deeper the search and the better the result. So that's been a significant driver. Another significant driver is that we've been, since the 1980s, using stochastic modeling techniques and estimating the parameters of those models using ever-increasing quantities of speech data. So in particular, the statistical modeling techniques that we use are hidden Markov modeling, Just recently, of course, some neural nets are coming back into fashion in speech, and deep neural nets are having a dramatic impact, but essentially the same kind of idea, modeling the variability of the signal. And the parameters are estimated on corpora, and it's interesting, if you look back 20, 30 years, people were working with minutes of speech, and considering that a huge amount of material to be training models with, that went up to hours, tens of hours. A typical system now, a state-of-the-art system, is trained on thousands of hours of speech material. So it's a huge quantity of data being used to estimate the parameters of the models. So that's been a main driver, and one of the reasons that we have year-on-year improvement is because larger and larger amounts of data become available to train our models. And the third driver is that, again, since the 80s, there's been very significant investment, particularly on the part of the funding agencies and governments, US government in particular, on benchmarking, in establishing a competitive, cooperative framework for really assessing just how well the technology works. And this has had a huge impact on our field. Prior to this kind of regime kicking off, it was very easy to do some work on speech in your lab, get some results on some data that you happen to have, publish them, and nobody would know the significance of what you've done because it's just not possible to compare from your particular data set to another one. So the funding agencies in particular started to release data, and data that everybody could use. It was in the open, and that acted as, of course, a normalizing effect on the whole community. So that led to a whole bunch of standards and resources. This has been a very good thing. So just to give you a feel for that, don't worry about the complexity of this. This is just a summary of many of the benchmark tests that have been taking place over the past, can't quite see the date there, but anyway, the past 15 years or so. And way back in 1988, yes, 88, 89 is the first date there, the tasks were very simple. Constrained tasks, limited vocabularies, clean environments. And the tasks have got increasingly more and more difficult. In the middle there, we've got conversational speech, speech over the telephone. And you'll see that, for those that can see nearer the front, you'll see that on the right-hand side, the latest results relate to figuring out what's happening in meetings. This is a very popular thing right now. So instrumenting a room where people are gathered and trying to recognize who's saying what, who's talking to who, what affective state they're in, all this kind of stuff. So we have a record of exactly how the technology has improved over a range of tasks and over a significant period of time. This, as I say, this is all down to providing resources and establishing standards. And another, what I like to think is reasonably significant event, because my name is on it, is that quite early on, the community got together to try to establish some protocols and some shared ideas about how to do things. So these books, which were edited contributions from a lot of different contributors, experts in different areas, created a repository where anybody just starting out in the field or wanting to do something slightly different could go to one of these handbooks and could look up, for example, how to make a recording. You'd think making a recording of a speech signal is pretty straightforward, but these books tell you that you actually have to know what you're doing, you have to think a little bit carefully about it, and it contains even ridiculously simple recommendations like, if you've got a microphone with a lead, don't allow the lead to tap on a bench, because that will just ruin your recording. And simple things like that. So these two books, which are quite thick, have become a kind of Bible to help people know how to establish the standard protocols across the entire field. And also, these community efforts created a kind of, yes, it's an industry really, for providing resources. So in America, we have the Linguistics Data Consortium, which gathers acoustic, spoken and text-based corpora. So there is a single repository. You can join as a member. You pay a subscription fee. It depends who you are, how much it is, whether you're an academic organization or an industrial organization. And you have access to an enormous amount of data, much of which other labs are working with. There are conferences which revolve entirely around language resources, such as LREC, which has been running for quite a few years now. There's a lot of interest in of course, just now in minority languages, languages which are perhaps disappearing, and how to give them technological support and collecting data and making sure that data goes into a central repository where it's available. And in Europe, we have an association, the European Language Resources Association, and its associated distribution agency, which essentially mirrors the American effort in coordinating the collection and distribution of pertinent data. So all this has been going on for quite some time. COCOSDA, by the way, that's an international organization, again, which is looking after these community efforts. So there's an awful lot of support that the community has put together itself in order to create credibility and to give everybody access to the kinds of resources that you need to actually do serious research and development. Another organization which has got in on the act is the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. There are a number of standards now established. Some of them have been around quite a long time. So anybody who wanted to write a voice-based web app, how long has it been? 10 years at least, I would think, yeah. There's a standard, voice XML, a markup language. You can voice enable a web application. You follow the standard, it will run on any browser. These things have had a huge impact in the penetration of the research techniques actually out there into the real world. And there's even a standard architecture, that's on the right, of how to put together a dialogue system. So that's a system which takes speech, analyzes what your intentions are, organizes its response and speaks back at you. Again, that's a standard, a W3C standard, so if you sign up to the standard, then you're going to be compatible, and that means your application could end up on all the different devices that are out there. So these things are really important. Okay, so that's all great news, and that's how things are progressing. Now, here's something which might hit at the heart of some people sitting in the audience. A lot of this progress is not coming from any deep understanding of what you and I are doing when we're engaging in spoken language interaction. Now, it rather depends who you are, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've actually marked it as neutral here, so I'm sitting on the fence. If you're a phonetician or a linguist, this is not great news. If you're an engineer, you know, you're just trying to get it out there, so it doesn't really matter. But that's something which we might want to discuss later. Okay, so I asked you all a little while ago about who was using it, and we ended up with nobody. And there is a reason for that. So we have fantastic technology, works very well on standard tests, it works very well in the lab, it works very well in clean clinical environments, doesn't work so well in the real world, doesn't work so well with incredible reverberation, doesn't work so well if you're surrounded by other people. Maybe you're in a train station and you suddenly need to talk to Siri. Good luck with that. It's very fragile in real conditions. So using that word real really carefully there. I don't mean difficult conditions, I mean just everyday conditions, the kind of places you really want to use this technology. It tends to fall over. It's also very expensive technology to construct applications, precisely because it's founded on the statistical modeling techniques and relies on huge corpora. If you want to build a new application, you can't just take an application that's working okay in one sort of domain and then just map it over. Nothing seems to generalize well. You actually have to collect the whole corpus again, so that's investing a huge amount of effort, and you have to effectively rebuild the system. If you're having trouble understanding that, just think, how you would go from, say, English to French or Japanese. You'd have to rebuild the whole system. There's only relatively little. The underlying principles are the same, but the actual data and how you estimate the parameters of the models is the same, but when you go through the process, you have to use a different set of data. So that's expensive. So that's not very good news, and so a lot of people in our field are trying to address that issue. Another slightly worrying thing is that since we're so well benchmarked, it's possible to extrapolate into the future and say, well, okay, we can see progress is going along like this. Where are we going to end up? So I've done this, and we're not going to end up in a great place. If we just carry on the way we are going to end up, it's going to get better every year, but the gains are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. In fact, in my field, in speech recognition right now, people get very excited in conferences about fractions of a percent improvement in speech recognition accuracy when the overall error rate is 20 to 25%, which basically means every fourth word is wrong. So what kind of application are you anticipating building with that sort of error rate? This is a real challenge. And as I say, if we just carry on doing what we're doing, then we're going to fall short, which is why we need to be on another curve. And that's where I see some very interesting discussions can take place to get us onto the curve, but that's not this talk. Okay, so we still have some way to go. All kinds of things get in the way of you using your speech recognizer and your speech technology. If your voice changes, then that is going to be a problem. There was a famous case in the UK not so long ago. As you know, the UK is sort of well known for having a large variety of fairly strong accents, like other countries. So in the city of Birmingham, which has a very distinctive accent, the council, it's the second largest city in the UK, right? So there's a significant investment. The council put in a speech tech system for the local community, and it just was hopeless. It just could not deal with the Birmingham accent. Huge investment, complete waste of money. Lots of interactive voice response systems there may work for you, but if your voice is somewhat different from the norm, you may have problems. You can't read that, but there's some very nice numbers for you on there. That is getahuman.com. There is a website dedicated to providing you with the phone numbers which allows you to avoid the automated voice system. It's a very popular website, getahuman.com, right? Write it down. The success of that is indicative that people have trouble dealing with these voice systems, and so they're finding ways of bypassing it. That's not great. What Siri shows, the popularity of the idea of Siri shows that there is a demand, there is a serious interest in going beyond just transcribing what people are saying and getting into a conversational interaction of some kind. But we have an interesting issue here, because if we think about a simple graph like this, which was given to me by a colleague, of usability versus flexibility, where simple dialogues, just paying your gas bill or something, down at the bottom left-hand corner, but low usability, low flexibility, and having a conversation with your human partner is the top right-hand corner, then adding the kind of stuff that Siri's got in it takes you up the curve a bit, which is absolutely great. But this seems to be the experience, that once you add a little bit more complexity, you plummet into this, what I've called here a habitability gap. In other words, the system, it's not got full language, which of course we would know how to deal with as users. It's got some sort of strange constraints, some subset of language, and for a naive user, this is a serious problem. You don't know what to say, you don't know what the system knows, and so this is at all levels. And so you end up into these catastrophic situations where the interaction just goes horribly wrong. That's not very good. Here's just want to show you a quick, I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I'll show a snippet of a video here, which is quite amusing, and it illustrates the mismatch between what a designer of an interactive voice system thinks we need to do to have a conversation and the reality of human conversation. So what we've got here is a couple who are on a blind date. It should be self-explanatory, and don't worry, the video sticks at the beginning and then eventually it'll catch up. I don't know why it does that. But...
Hi, I'm Julie.
Nice to finally meet you. I haven't been on a blind date in a while. So, Doug told me you work in customer service.
That's right. I do the voice recordings for companies such as United Airlines, Blue Cross, and Amtrak.
Wow, Amtrak, huh? Well, then I guess I have talked to you before.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Oh. No, nothing. Stupid joke.
Hey, can I get you something to drink?
Oh, what do you think, Julie? A latte or cappuccino or something?
Did you say latte or cappuccino?
I said both. You know, do you want a latte or cappuccino?
My mistake. Cappuccino would be great. Gary, before we go any further, let me get some information.
Sure.
Please say your age.
Oh, yeah. I get that a lot. I know I look young, but I'm actually 29.
I think you said 19. Did I get that right?
No, 29.
I think you said 9. Did I get that right?
No. Wow, 29.
Okay, got it. Sorry, it's pretty loud in here.
Here you guys.
So I'll stop that there because it goes on. It's actually, in case you want to know, they get together at the end because he's taken advantage of her inability to hold a normal conversation. Right. So that's obviously that's just a sketch, but that was on 2020, which is a big TV program in the States, right? Saturday night. Saturday night. Yeah. So you know, the popular impression is that, just as you demonstrated when you answered my question, is that actually the technology is really not quite there yet. I mentioned the issue of the ever-increasing amounts of data, and there's an interesting question which I asked. So here we've got a graph of error rate. Error rate is always plotted high at the top, low at the bottom, so we're interested in things going down. So you can see on the horizontal axis there, hours of speech. This is some French results, and you can see some graphs which are indeed going down. In other words, the more data that you train on, then the better the performance. That's well known. You'll notice I just slipped in human level of error rate on this particular task, which is pretty low. And you'll notice that one of these curves, don't worry why there are three, but one of them finally makes it. But notice that the horizontal axis is in log scale. So we have, you know, 1 hour, 10 hours, and on the right-hand side we've got 10 million hours of speech to train our models on. 10 million hours of speech. So what interested me when I saw these kinds of results is, so what actually is that equivalent to? Well, a 2-year-old has heard about 1,000 hours of speech, and a 2-year-old is not that well advanced in terms of spoken language. Of course, the interaction is fantastic, but their ability to, you know, their vocabulary is somewhat limited. Their expressive ability is limited. A 10-year-old has heard 10,000 hours of speech. A 10-year-old's spoken language ability is pretty much finalized, so it's almost adult level now. And so now we're beginning to see, you know, the 2-year-old, it looked quite good. You say, okay, well, our machines don't even know as much as a 2-year-old. But our machines definitely do know more now than a 10-year-old, and yet we're still falling way short. So what do these larger number means? Well, in your lifetime, you will have heard or participated in about 100,000 to 1 million hours of speech, and this is more than 70 lifetimes worth of material, which kind of makes you think, okay, we've got this powerful paradigm for building models, but it is essentially reproducing evolution of the structures rather than what a child is doing. In other words, there's a devastating lack of priors in our statistical models. Okay. I just slipped this one in this morning because I thought it might be also relevant to this network. A few years ago, I've been asked several times to do surveys. Most of you participated in a survey that Vincent organized. And the survey was basically asking when certain things might come to pass. So people, if you took part in the EUCog survey, you know what I'm talking about. So you're putting dates on things. And this is this is the cumulative result over a whole bunch of different questions, so it's sort of medians across everything. But you'll notice that I've run this survey 3 times, 6 years apart. And I don't expect you to see exactly what's going here but let me just point out that the second survey, the median, was essentially 6 years further on than the first one. And then the third survey, which was conducted 6 years later, the median was 6 years on again. So in other words, if you just believe the first survey and said, oh yes, everything's going to happen in 20 years, 6 years later, everything's going to happen in 20 years. So these promises are never fulfilled. From the researcher's perspective, the technology is always that far out. And you know, it's more related to the psychology of when you get your grants and things like that than to any kind of reality. So this is just a little health warning on believing everything in a survey tells you when you ask experts to project into the future. And I thought, since speech and language, many of you might be interested in language, I thought I'd just show this little video as well. This went viral, I think, about 12 months ago, so you may have seen it. I'm sure have heard of chatbots. Chatbots are essentially language engines which are working from text rather than from speech. There's a chatbot called Cleverbot, which somebody, I think the actual designers, thought, I wonder what would happen if we asked Cleverbot to talk to itself. So you're going to see that. Now, as a speech person, I'm particularly amused that Cleverbot cannot say the word Cleverbot, as you will see.
Hello there.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. You?
I'm okay.
That's good.
Are you good?
Yes, I am good. I just said I was.
No, you didn't. I said I was.
So you are a robot?
No, my name is Cleverbot.
Yes, you are a robot and your name is Cleverbot.
I am a robot.
Yes, I know.
Together we are robots.
I'm not a robot. I'm a unicorn.
But you said earlier that you were a robot.
And so it goes on. Again, you can find that pretty easily. But it just, when you do this kind of thing, it just kind of suddenly reveals the big mismatch between the reality and just how far the technology has got. Okay, so this mismatch between reality and what the technology can actually do, this is a really key issue. And our field has been guilty of misrepresentation. I own up to that. At least 3 times in the last 25 years, I would say, there have been waves of over-promising. Basically say, yeah, talk to your machine, talk to your computer, it's natural, do this, do that. You can find, vendors' literature. There's one I particularly like. You've been learning since birth the only skill needed to use our technology. In other words, speech. And then you get it, and of course, it doesn't work. So if you overpromise, for example, if you put a video of a robot doing something which it's actually not really doing, but it's a nice video, then all you've just done is dig a little hole under yourself when it comes to the next round of funding, because when you're saying this is a hard problem, people out there will say, well, I'm sure I saw a video of that. I thought that was all solved. So it's very, very important, our field has discovered, to try to be very upfront about this. Interestingly, only last night, Google released a video, which in the workshop we might be able to play, of their latest speech stuff. And it's very interesting that a lot of what they're saying is, this is a serious problem. We made great progress, but this is a huge problem, and we're just starting. That's after 200 years of research. So, and that's what Google's saying with all their data. So they're being very careful to head down reality way rather than up promises avenue. Okay, so just want to now come back to this because I want to identify some particular issues, and then I'm going to wind up, which are these. these were main drivers. So I was pointing to these as positive aspects of the kind of way that we tackle research in our field. But I want to also point out that there are, it's not all positive. There are some downsides. So for example, the fact that computers are so powerful now, and with people using GPUs and all this kind of stuff, and most speech research is done on grid computing, using up every ounce of computer power that your university's got available. It's usually the speech lab doing that. It means that sometimes you don't think too hard. You think, well, I've got a few parameters here. It doesn't seem to be working as well as I want. I'll just twist this, change this value, change that value, get lots of nice graphs, get some publications probably, but you're not really learning anything. You're just optimizing, you're basically training it with your personal manual intervention. This is not very satisfactory. The corpus-driven approach means one is almost entirely dependent on the data, because if you collect more data, the system is very likely to get better. But of course, what is this data? And a lot of data is very artificial. One of the interesting things about Siri and its colleagues being out there in the real world is that actually people like Google and Apple are collecting real data now. So that is going to have a very interesting impact. But we are over-reliant on data, and I made the point that we have this lack of prior, which is a serious issue. And then the benchmark testing, which is pushing things along, has a tendency to really inhibit people's innovation and creativity. There have been cases, particularly with DARPA funding, that if you didn't do well in the competition that year, you would lose your funding. So what are you going to do? Try something wildly different that might almost guarantee to fail or not be competitive, or do you go and get another 1,000 hours of speech? You get 1,000 hours of speech, and you get that increment, and you get a pat on the back, and you don't lose your funding. So these are serious issues. So serious that there was a paper published in the 90s when this benchmarking was really a powerful paradigm. Look at this title, Towards Increasing Error Rates. Increasing error rates. So these are respected people in the field arguing very, very strongly. We've got to we're in danger of being stuck in a local minimum. If we're going to really make progress, we've got to be allowed to be innovative and therefore to fail and find our way to another place in the search space of possible solutions here. And that's had a positive effect. The community discussed this. The benchmarking is now not quite so hard on people, but also the community is kind of taking it back to themselves. So there are now regular, what are called challenges, and there's just a few examples here. So singing, synthesis, audio-visual, chime is recognition of speech in noise. These are community-inspired efforts where a bunch of people who are interested in a particular issue, they collect data, they get to prepare a regime which then people compete in, but it's done by the community rather than by a sponsoring organization who might, as I say, withdraw funding if you don't do very well. Yeah, and there are prizes, like a little plaque there, it's very nice. And some of these things have been running a long time. So the Blizzard Challenge is a community-led competition on speech synthesis. That's been running for, 15 years or something, I think. Okay, so if you're interested in any of this, and particularly the history of the field, then there's two great books. Roberto Piracini, who used to be here in Turin, actually, been working in the States for many years, has written a fantastic book published last year called The Voice in the Machine, and it's actually it's about the history of the field and the lessons learnt, and a lot of the things that I've been talking about are covered in that, and it's a very comfortable and gentle read. It's quite enjoyable. And then this book on the right here, author sitting in the front row, just about to speak to you, by Bruce. It's better to be a good machine than a bad person. So you can guess where Bruce is coming from, and I sign up very well to Bruce's perspective. We have to really think what it is we're trying to create when we're making a machine interact with a human using the voice. Also, on my website, I've actually got a page dedicated to the history of our field. There's a very long timeline of things that have happened, and some other bits and pieces there if you're very interested. I also, I can't miss the opportunity to stick in a little advert. There's a new book coming out from Judith Markowitz, who Bruce and some of you may know, Robots That Talk and Listen. I've got a chapter in there, and you'll notice the title is From Talking and Listening Robots to Intelligent Communicative Machines, which is something we might want to talk about in the workshop also. But that's me done. Clap the hands, okay. That's always good.